It began with a verdict that, decades later, still splits a nation down the middle. This wasn't just any trial. It was the most watched legal proceeding in American history, a moment when millions of people, staring at the same television screens, saw two completely different realities. How did one case manage to captivate, divide, and ultimately challenge the very foundation of the American justice system? To understand what happened, we first have to remember who he was before the world knew him as a defendant. O.J. Simpson was more than a football player. He was an American icon. On the field, he was the juice, a force of nature who glided past defenders with an unmatched grace and power, setting records that etched his name into the history books. But his appeal transcended sports. He was a movie star, a familiar face in commercials, and a beloved media personality. In an era of deep racial divides, Simpson seemed to exist in a space above it all. He was welcomed in every home, his charm and million-dollar smile making him one of the most recognizable and adored figures in the country. He wasn't just a celebrity. He was a symbol of success, proof that the American dream was attainable for anyone. But behind the polished public image, a different story was unfolding, one that few people were willing to see. The signs were there, scattered like whispers in the wind. Police had been called to his residence on multiple occasions for domestic disturbances. Friends and family later recounted moments of fear, of a possessiveness and temper that felt dangerously out of place with the easygoing man the world thought it knew. These were the dissonant notes in a carefully composed symphony of fame, hints of a private life that was far more turbulent than his public one. These warnings, however, were largely ignored, lost in the blinding glare of his celebrity. Then, on a quiet June evening in 1994, everything changed. Two lives were brutally ended in a tranquil Brentwood neighborhood. The details of the crime scene were grim, and the investigation began immediately. From the outset, law enforcement felt they were on solid ground. A trail of evidence seemed to lead, with unsettling speed and certainty, directly to one person, O.J. Simpson. The investigators were confident the evidence, they believed, was overwhelming. In their minds, it was an open and shut case. The arrest of one of America's biggest heroes seemed imminent, a tragic, but straightforward, conclusion to a horrifying crime. But nothing about this case would be straightforward. On the day he was supposed to surrender, O.J. Simpson vanished. The nation held its breath. Then, a bizarre spectacle unfolded on the freeways of Southern California. A white Ford Bronco, trailed by a convoy of police cars, moved slowly down the highway. Helicopters swarmed the sky, broadcasting the surreal chase to a stunned world. Television networks interrupted their regular programming, even the NBA Finals, to show the live feed. People gathered on overpasses, holding signs, some cheering for O.J., some just watching in disbelief. This single event became a national obsession. It wasn't just a car chase, it was a public unraveling. For some, it was the desperate flight of a guilty man. For others, it was the tragic cry for help from a cornered hero. The country was already choosing sides, and the trial hadn't even begun. When the case finally moved from the highways to the courthouse, the setting transformed into a national stage. This was never going to be just a legal battle. It was destined to be a public drama of unprecedented scale. On one side stood the prosecution, armed with what they called a mountain of evidence. They were confident, perhaps overconfident, believing the facts would speak for themselves. On the other side, an assembly of legal talent unlike any other, the Dream Team. This group of high-powered attorneys understood something crucial. This trial wouldn't be won or lost on DNA and timelines alone. Their strategy was revolutionary. It wasn't just about proving their clients' innocence. It was about planting a seed of doubt. Doubt in the evidence, doubt in the procedure, and most importantly, doubt in the Los Angeles Police Department. They were putting the entire system on trial. The prosecution methodically laid out its case, presenting hundreds of exhibits and calling witness after witness to establish a timeline of the crime. They presented blood evidence, hair fibers, and a history of domestic abuse. Each piece of evidence was meant to be another brick in a wall of guilt, a wall they believed was insurmountable. They walked the jury through the crime scene, the investigation, and the science that, in their view, pointed to only one possible suspect. The courtroom became a classroom, with experts explaining the intricacies of DNA analysis, a technology that was still relatively new to the general public. The prosecution's narrative was clear, direct, and damning. The sheer volume of their evidence was intended to be overwhelming, to leave no room for any other possibility. Then came the moment that would define the trial in the public imagination, a moment of pure courtroom theater. The prosecution, in a move they likely thought was a masterstroke, asked O.J. Simpson to try on a pair of leather gloves, one found at the crime scene, the other at his estate. The world watched in silence as he struggled to pull them over his hands. They didn't seem to fit. In that moment of visual drama, the prosecution's carefully constructed case seemed to falter. The defense team seized on the image, coining a phrase that would become legendary: "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." It didn't matter what the scientific explanations were for why the gloves might not fit. What mattered was what everyone saw. Perception, in that moment, became more powerful than evidence. The image was so simple, so compelling. It cut through months of complex testimony and became the symbol of reasonable doubt. But the glove was only one part of a much larger story. The defense was about to pivot the entire trial in a new direction, shifting the focus away from their client and onto the people who had built the case against him. They argued that what looked like a mountain of evidence was, in fact, the product of a compromised and biased investigation. The conversation in the courtroom was about to expand, to include decades of history, racial tension, and a deep-seated distrust between the African American community and the LAPD. The defense was preparing to put a key figure on the stand, a detective whose credibility would become the central battleground of the entire case. The trial of O.J. Simpson was about to become a trial of the system itself. What happens when the people sworn to protect and serve are the ones accused of corruption? How does a jury find the truth when they can no longer trust the storytellers? The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose the deepest fractures in American society, asking a question that remains unresolved. In a system where trust is broken, can justice truly be found? That story, and the detective at its center, is where we going in part 2. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it.